Thank you for watching. Can you hear me well? I can hear some music. Yes. Thank you for watching. As we all definitely know now, the question before us is not really whether the problem exists, but how to strengthen policy, close implementation gaps, and make compliance the default rather than the exception. I'm Silvia Lazzaris. I'm a freelance journalist, and I'm collaborating with the Pickers campaign. The Pickers campaign has toured across 6 countries, facilitated more than 300 special events with the documentary you just watched, from farms to churches to universities and parliaments. And the Pickers campaign has been managing to include many stakeholders, so retailers, unions, civil society, policymakers. The goal is to press for institutional changes rather than just symbolic empathy, to turn what you just saw into something that can help to change things. And thousands of individual and organizational endorsements of the call to action "We Want a Fair Pick" has signaled to us that concern for the issue is not confined to certain stakeholders or political camps, but anyone who is confronted with these truths wants to do something about it. The movie has circulated as we said, as a prompt of institutional discussion around labor standards, market rules, public money, accountability across borders. And the questions it leaves are quite simple, actually. If we consider these conditions unacceptable, then what follows? What can we do? And if these conditions persist in a regulated sector, then what is missing in the chain of responsibility? So today, what we want to do is examine 5 policy levers. Each of them could justify, of course, months of discussion. Here we will give each one roughly 10 minutes. But the aim is not to exhaust the subject, rather to identify precise points where policy or implementation can move. So for each topic, we will hear one concrete proposal from an expert and then invite the other panelists or also all of you to pose focus questions or state specific follow-up intentions or share reflections. So this format will hopefully keep us disciplined and make space for constructive and concrete discussion rather than commentary. Let's begin with the first one, which is around corporate due diligence and omnibus, which is also the foundation, responsibility up the chain. Because if those who profit from our agri-food systems cannot be held responsible, then nothing else holds. Here in the panel, we have Margherita Romanelli. She works on supply chain accountability and workers' rights at WeWorld. Hi, Margherita. She has direct experience on EU due diligence legislation. And so I'd like to ask her, Margherita, the omnibus process is narrowing due diligence obligations and delaying their effect. From your perspective, what specific safeguards should not be weakened if we want due diligence to remain credible in the agricultural sector, and why?
Thank you, Silvia, and thank you for this occasion of dialogue. Regarding the due diligence, we know that we assist to a process that was watering during the last few months. We know that last year was approved one directive, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and regarding which there was the possibility to implement the obligation, or not the possibility, the obligation for the corporates to implement a due diligence process to reduce and to avoid, reduce the risk, and so then avoid the exploitation of people and exploitation of a planet along the value chain in the corporate activities. So at the beginning of this year was opened this process of omnibus. With the omnibus, we assisted to a progressive, during the discussion, a progressive reduction of all provisions that were achieved with the due diligence directive. But what we have to say before then the vote tomorrow we will have the plenary vote at the parliaments that will approve in a quite definitive way the new formulation of the directive, the one that now is called under Omnibus One, we can say today that many think was cancelled from the previous um, directive, but still we have to remember that we still have some aspect that could protect, could be used in order to eradicate the exploitation. What I would like to underline is that for the first time in Europe, we pass from the um, social responsibility of the corporate that are voluntary to a mandatory approach. So then, even though this directive will be applied only to those companies that are have more than 5,000 of employees and more than 1.5 billion Europe in terms of worldwide turnover, we have to understand that what is good is that we still have the risk-based approach. So then it means that in the value chain, the very large companies that dominates the agri-food system has to apply a control alongside the value chain up to the end and to the small producers in order to avoid that it could be met some violation of human rights or environmental rights. And in case of violation, they should remediate and they should suspend the dealing with such kind of providers. So then, of course, it's not what we expected because our requests were much more stronger, but we have to deal now with this law, and we have to take the advantages of this law. And the next 2 years, we could work at the single countries in order to implement in a national rule that could have a good implementation and could be a good tool to prevent the kind of violation that we have seen during the within in the movies and during the screen of the movies. So then, in very specifically, I want to underline three aspects. First of all, yes, the mandatory aspect. Secondly, the aspect of a civil responsibility, so then that at the moment is not anymore harmonized in Europe, but is still there is still a civil responsibility country by country. So in those countries where there is not civil responsibility liability, so then it should be asked a civil liability that complement such kind of law. This is a technical aspect, but we can work on this aspect. And then the third aspect that is very important is that the workers and the civil society is well equipped in order to rise the problems and rise which are the elements that create a violation in the human rights in order to rise the problems and in order to make this law applicable and in order to stop the kind of business that the large companies can do alongside the value chain. That means practically, and then I go towards the end, practically we have that in a supermarket, for example, the large supermarket are obliged to verify that alongside the value chain, there could not be founded any violation of human rights and labor workers.
Thank you, Margherita. And speaking of remedying to violations, one concrete result of supply chain legislation is the introduction of grievance mechanisms. So formal ways for people to complain safely when something goes wrong without fear of retaliation and with remedies. Christian Moller leads Appellando, which developed a grievance framework adopted by major retailers and producers in German-speaking countries and also other countries. Christian, what is your proposal to ensure that a grievance mechanism works?
Yeah, well, thank you, Sylvia. I think a grievance mechanism is the foremost, should actually generate trust, and it should give a voice to the most vulnerable people. And I know Gerardo can speak about it from practice. What we want to do it now is, as we have these large corporations and companies, which most of them, by the way, were in favor to keep it strong, the CSDDD. Yeah, they wanted this, and now they, of course, the big ones are still in that case, and they want to do it in an effective way. So using the UN guiding principles, which are all part and embedded in the legislation, but also to scale it. And in order to scale it, we need to make it also cost effective. And core of all of this is, I think, and that's what I see as the big opportunity here, is collaboration. Collaboration on a horizontal between companies that are buyers, but also collaboration in the supply chain. So with that dialogue, we're able to scale this and to make this a responsive, shared and fair process. So this fair pick would also be a fair process, and that would we would be able to set up sector initiatives like Appellando. They, I think, will be the key. It's not the individual company and grievance mechanisms that can find a solution. It's in the end the aggregated way of a new smart way to organize this, so that wherever a worker is and identifies a risk or is being violated in their own rights, or identifies an environmental violation, which we shouldn't forget as well, there should be a trusted place where the responsible supply chain partners can respond, can identify, is it substantiated, and then, of course, create a good remediation, so that there is no fear for retaliation if you say something, and there is a honest and transparent way, so that consumers worldwide, in particular in Europe, have um, a good feeling when they buy and shop with these large companies that are now obliged even more in 2028, 29 to then enforce it. I think that most of these big ones will actually start much earlier.
Thank you so much. And by the way, CSDDD stands for Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. So the EU law that requires large companies to identify, prevent, address human rights and environmental abuses across their supply chains, just in case someone who's listening is not familiar with that. Next up, well, first of all, is there anyone who would like to comment on what we just said? Hannah, are you reporting any comments? You let us know when you have anything, but I don't know if anyone wants to add anything. Otherwise, we can move on to the second policy lever. Let's just move on, and then let's see if we put more wood on the fire. So next up is fair prices, because where production costs, including lawful wages, exceed what wholesale buyers are willing to pay, then exploitation becomes just the economic logic of the sector, the business model. Here we have Giuseppe Peppe Pugliese from SOS Rosarno, a farmers network founded by him after the Rosarno riots to build an alternative to exploitation in agriculture, trying to connect small producers and migrant workers through fair contracts and decent housing, transparent prices. Pepe, what can we do to ensure that fair prices are actually paid to small producers? Also, you might recognize him because he was just featured a little while ago in the movie.
Oh, good evening, and thank you all for having us here. we are from a agricultural place. I'm sorry for my English is not so good, so I hope you will forgive me. If something is not clear, I will do my best to with my
There's
spaghetti
nothing to
English.
forgive. There's nothing to forgive.
Okay, and we are from an agricultural place. A place where in 2010 there was a social disaster. Okay, we don't talk about it now, but from that moment we realized that we had to do an analysis of what happened. And after that, we understood that a place that in the past was very rich thanks to the agriculture, in that moment, in 2010, it was the totally different. It was a totally different situation, and we have to start to see how it works in the so-called free market. Okay, a, a producer in most of the cases is an employer, right? And so if the producer sells what he produces at a low price, often lower than production cost, someone has to tell us how he can produce and how we can respect the contract of the workers. And this is not a justification of who doesn't respect the workers. This is an analysis. We know that the producer doesn't have any possibility to decide when a big purchasing center talk to a producer. The producer doesn't have any chance to decide. He can only accept the condition or refuse. And the way to try to dismantle this problem of exploitation of workers is to have transparency and clearness in all the chain. And we can't do anything if we don't talk about who decide the price and how much is the price. And we have to establish a fairness indices by law. If I have sold the fruit I have produced it at a low price, lower than what I spent to produce, how could I have respected the workers' contract? We have to establish by law a minimum and sustainable price paid to the producer. We have to establish by law the so-called source price. I don't know if is correct. So a price that must be indicated on the labels on the fruit in the supermarket. The purchasing center must publicly declare how much they pay producers for the fruit that they sold in their stores, because producers have no bargaining power. They can only accept or refuse. And in this exploitation chain, the producer is the penultimate link, and the worker is the ultimate link. So if we put clearness in our project, in the fair trade system, in the critical consumption, transparency, clearness is the main point. And until we will not obtain clearness in all the chain, we will not resolve anything. We can talk about Caponero, Caporale, how much we can also arrest thousands and thousands of employers who don't make contract, don't respect totally contract, and blah blah blah. But we don't solve the problem. If listen, and I finish. If I sell a tomato sauce in a supermarket at €1.50 or €1, €1.20 or 90 cents, how can we think that that tomato sauce has been produced?
Definitely. No, it's so important. It's important.
Are we joking?
Yeah. And
someone has to explain us. Someone has to explain to the public opinion how it can be sustainable.
Yeah. And actually, there have been proposals from European coordination Via Campesina to make it illegal to pay producers less than cost of production, including fair wages. So the question here is, would that solve it? What would the industry say to that? I mean, Christian, your members are supermarkets. Do you have any insight on that?
Can I take just
Yeah,
20 seconds?
Yes.
20.
You can.
In 2013, in 5 Italian cities, in front of 5 supermarket shops of an Italian big supply chain, we went in front of the supermarket in the same morning with our friends and supporters. And in the meantime, we asked to this supply chain, very big supply chain organization, please, could you declare how much is paid to the producer the fruit you are selling in your shops? They never replied. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, Christian, do you want to comment on that, or anyone else in the panel?
Well, I cannot speak on behalf of the retailers. Of course, we do have a market, and the market has negotiation, and we know it's a commodity that also has sometimes a time when it rots, right? When it's only a temporary shelf life. So sometimes you have climate conditions, and it's then to fight food waste at the same time when there's oversupply. So sometimes prices have to respond to. But I think transparency is definitely something which could be considered. We see also the differentiation. One example is in Germany, where there was the same discussion, and the German Farmers Union, as well with the German retailers, have created, which is not really European, created like a German origin label, just to differentiate this again, to make a different price. But that's not exactly what we would like to see in a European setting. Yeah, so there are different initiatives, and I think it's the supply chain partnership, something that what you're doing with your direct customers, that's what helps you, right? And the commitment of buyers to really take care about their producers, so have a long-term relationship, go with high prices and low prices and have a good average. That's what I see in different markets that work, wherever there is not this mass commodity markets.
Thank you so much. I see that Margherita raised her hand.
Yes, just I want to say that this is a problem not only to the supermarket, but is a general problem because, for instance, We are doing a new research regarding the canteen, the distribution of food, for example, in the hospitals, and that is a public procurement and from the public health system. And each meal, a complete meal, the value, the price is €1.30. So then with the €1.30, you have to pay the pickers, you have to pay the production, you have to pay the cookers, you have to pay the distribution, and you have to pay the packaging, and so on. So then how could be possible to be sustainable with €1.30 for a complete meal? And if you are sick and you are in an hospital, you risk to be one person that exploit, and because you eat such kind of meal. And so then what I recommend in the direction that Pepe says is also to work for public procurement that is very important in terms of economics turnover, in order to ask the minimum level of prices at least to the public procurement, because this could change a little bit, start to change the system. Thank you.
And for anyone who doesn't know about public procurement, that's the mechanism through which, entire countries purchase food for schools, prisons, hospitals, and it's a huge amount of food, and they could make a difference as an actor in the market. Jonas, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. My name is Jonas. I'm a journalist, and I was part of the Pickers film team as well as a different investigation. I've done some work in agricultural supply chains in the last years, and I find the approach or the suggestion Pepe has quite interesting because on the one end, I've been talking to many different people and organizations in the supply chain, producers, agents along the way, retailers, and many of them tend to say, in the end, the consumer will decide if a product is good or not. It's up to the consumer to decide what he or she thinks, and that's the way the market works. We're adapting to this. Where I would say, well, the consumer is not in a position to really decide, because you don't have all the information you have as a consumer, right? You see the final price, but you don't know what's going on along the supply chain. I think the approach Pepe takes is to bring a little bit more transparency into that supply chain and leave it up to the consumers to then decide, which I think is a very interesting approach. Although I fear there might be some resistance by retailers because as far as my research is concerned, it's one of the biggest business secrets of retailers, how much they pay to their producers.
But I have to get in here. We had one retailer that tried it. A very big retailer put a fair trade banana and said, "Oh, my entire banana will be fair trade." And that's the very transparent buying concept. Directly transfer of money to producers. They had a double-digit reduction in sales in that section. So the company had to withdraw and change the policy here. And if every retailer together would say, okay, we all pay different and pay more, there's also some antitrust if they talk about joint prices. So we also have to deal with that part. Yeah. So I think it is not as easy. I think transparency and new market rules would be good, but sometimes just to say I pay more as an individual buyer is in fact a consumer choice issue.
Absolutely, and we see it with other parts of other types of decisions. For example, with organic, it's not really led to an increase in the production of organic. We have about 10% in Europe, but around the world is 1 to 2%. So it's we need to also work on the sort of raising the bar for everyone. But yeah, it's an interesting approach. I would move on to the next policy lever, which is different from fair price, but it's about labor mobility and recruitment, because we have recruitment chains. We were talking about their opacity. We have very opaque recruitment chains. The intermediaries multiply and accountability dissolves. And so we have a system that cannot see its workers and therefore cannot protect its workers. In the panel, we have Roxane Wadgiri Assani from the Comité contre l'esclavage moderne, the Committee Against Modern Slavery. It is one of France's leading organizations fighting modern slavery and labor exploitation, and they do so through victim support, legal action, and policy work. We're glad to have them as partner of the Pickers campaign, because since 2022, their legal unit has been involved in 3 major trials on the exploitation of foreign workers in agriculture, 2 of them in the Champagne region. And in 2024, they partnered with France's anti-trafficking coordinator and the Office for Immigration and Integration to distribute a leaflet on labor rights to all Tunisian nationals applying for French visas, including agricultural workers. So, Roxane, first of all, if you want to expand on any of this, we'd be happy to have you explain a little bit more of your work, since it's the first time you're on a panel with us. But then I'd like to ask you what concrete policy changes would make these labor mobility schemes visible and accountable and not a vector for abuse.
Thank you, Sylvia. So I think this is a very, very broad question, also because there are different recruitment processes, I think, depending on each European countries, also sectors and the level of, where you are working in the supply chain. One thing that is very concrete that could be changed for France, if we take this example, because it's the one I know, is that we have an online platform for the recruitment of foreign workers. And it's mainly used for what we call seasonal workers, so the one who only come for a part of the years, or 2 years, 6 months, 8 months, for example, for agriculture, but also for the hospitality sector, so bars and restaurants, the one on beaches, etc., which have very high touristic seasons. And until recently in France, this platform was managed by the Ministry of Labor. And it shifted to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, which is the one delivering most of residential permits and the one linked, with the fight against irregular migration in France. And since that, we have witnessed a very problematic evolution where a lot of those seasonal workers, they are actually buying contracts in their countries through intermediaries. So people who are in between, for example, Morocco and France, or Tunisia and France, and who will tell them, if you pay 10,000 euros, I can get you a contract, I can put you in relation with a boss in France, and we will get your visa, etc. And I think this process is very well depicted in the Pickers movie, with the young man in Nepal who wants to come to Portugal to work in the field. And this is a very new scheme that has been observed. And there is a problem with that, because all of those workers, they must be declared to the Ministry of Labor. But now the ministry managing this platform is not the Ministry of Labor. Also, of course, the labor inspection, which is in charge of, controlling if the housing conditions of the worker is good or not. Well, they depend on the Ministry of Labor and not the Ministry of Internal Affairs. So this is a huge problem. It's the same state, and yet all those layers in the administration, we need them, but they also tend to complexify a lot of things. And since that changed, which is not very, for me, not very well argumented, we don't really understand what the motivation was. We have witnessed a higher and higher number of such cases, and it has now become kind of systemic, as is already exploitation in every sector. And for France, it appeared with Moroccan nationals. So a lot and lot of Moroccan workers, they have been recruited and exploited through this kind of schemes because then they are in debt. So even if their salaries are paid, they must work for over a year to cover the fees that they gave to the intermediary or to the boss directly. They are in very overcrowded housings, etc. And now, because there had been so much spotlight on those who are Moroccan workers, we saw that it moved to Tunisia, for example. I will end this first question here, but I also really wanted to react to the exchange that just happened between Jonas and Christian. So if you give me the floor again, I will.
You have the floor.
Okay, so we just move to my next to the next thing I wanted to say, but I think it's very interesting this question of the buyer's choice and the question of the fair price, because us at CCM, because we see everything not through a particular sector or not through a particular part of the economy. We only focus on exploitation and the victim of what we call human trafficking for labor exploitation. And this really shows us that we have exploitation in France in all sectors. So construction, care, cleaning, etc., etc. And when I talk about human trafficking, I'm really talking about the worst cases of labor exploitation and not just poor working conditions. And I think what is very interesting is that, for example, we had all those cases in the Champagne region. And I think Champagne is the most perfect example because it is a very luxury product. The selling cost is very, very high. It's the most expensive wine in the world. And yet, the cost of picking the grapes, it's close to zero. So as a buyer, what should I be thinking? That if I buy the most expensive thing, necessarily it is free of exploitation? Apparently, no. And also, we have an example that I really like to use when we discuss this topic. Is that some years ago we had a case with Moroccan workers. It was way before this phenomenon I was talking about, but they were still very much exploited. It was in a rural locality near Paris, and I think there were only 5 workers. So a very small agricultural company. They were farming herbs, organic ones, and zucchinis. So very small productions of organic products that were being sold directly to the Parisian markets. So as a buyer, naturally, I would think, oh, it's organic. It's a very close, it's close, so low transportation. It's a very small chain because it's sold directly by the producer. But still, the workers, they were living in caravans without water, without electricity. They were not being paid. They were beaten. So I think at some point, the only thing that we can do is more and more control and more prevention. Also, maybe have more mediatized cases to discourage employers who behave like that. But I don't think that we should only look at a huge supply chain because it also happens in very small firms. And also we cannot put all the responsibility or the principal major responsibility on the consumers.
You're giving me a perfect segue because one of the issues is also public funds flowing in the hands of those who exploit, and often in the hands of those who get so much public funding and where there's a lot of added value. For example, in the Italian Langhe, where expensive wine is produced, you would expect, we hear this issue described as it pertains to to fresh fruits and vegetables where there's not much added value, but that's not necessarily the case. And so I'd like to talk about a new policy lever, which is the improved social conditionality. Jonas Seufert, he already introduced himself, but he's a German journalist and investigator. He is currently working with Fragtenstat. He was part of the research team behind The Pickers, the documentary you just watched. And he was a colleague of mine on an international investigation we worked on this year. It was published across Germany, the UK, Italy, France, Spain, and Austria. And it was specifically on this issue of public funds flowing into the hands of those who have already been convicted or it's clear that they have been exploiting. I'd like to ask Jonas, why do we need an improved social conditionality, but also if you can summarize some of the key findings from our investigation, because there's not just the money that comes from consumers, but there's also the money that comes directly from the EU without many questions asked.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sylvia. So as you mentioned, in this investigation, we found a sort of structural blind spot within a key policy by the EU. I think that's something you have to understand in the beginning. The EU subsidizes European farming with billions of euros every year. Actually, that amounts to a quarter of the EU budget. And that is taxpayers' money that can and should be used for the good of everyone, I would say. So for consumers as well as producers, as well as workers on the fields. However, in that investigation we could reveal that farm owners who intimidate or exploit migrant workers at the same time receive millions in agricultural subsidies. There are no checks and balances in place that are working at this point of time. Just to give you an example, in Campania, for example, in Italy, there was a farmer who was convicted of exploitation and gangmastering to a sentence of 2.5 years to prison. And he received more money, more CAP money after the conviction than he received before the conviction. Now there is on EU level a mechanism in place that is supposed to prevent that. It's called social conditionality, and it was introduced only a few years ago. And in a way, it's a political victory if you think from the perspective of labor rights. It recognized for the first time the need to tie this EU funding to minimal labor standards, at least. Now, what we found in this investigation is not only dozens of cases where this mechanism I explained was in place, but also that this policy, as it was initially negotiated and also rolled out, is rather toothless at this point of time, is not efficient, basically. It's not effective, sorry. And that has to do with three things, I would say. The first is the scope. So only a specific set of abuses goes in there. For example, the need to have a written contract, but if you don't pay the minimum wage as a farmer, for example, you will not be touched by this policy because they don't look at the minimum wage at the moment. Then penalties is a second problem. The default penalty is a deduction of the fund of 3 to 5%, which is if you receive 100,000 euros, a penalty of 3,000 or 5,000 euros, and it's considered not to be very deterring, actually. And the third part is implementation. So in the countries we found, there was little implementation so far. Just to give an example, in Austria, the social conditionality mechanism was applied to one single farmer in 3 years for repeated offenses, and he paid 3,000 euro. Now, what should be done? I think a very concrete, although in only one policy area, but a very concrete step could be to improve exactly this social conditionality mechanism, to broaden the scope, to raise the sanctions, and to put some money, provide some money for implementation. There's a great window of opportunity right now because it's negotiated at this moment, the new round of CAP money and the circumstances under which farmers get this money. And there has been this talk about deregulation going on at this point. Companies and also farming association have called for deregulation, cutting the so-called red tape. We need less bureaucracy, and the claim is we're not competitive here anymore in Europe. And this might be certain in some fields, but I would say in this field, it doesn't apply at all. Like, this is not an issue of competitiveness. If you take that to a logical conclusion, then that would mean a farmer can only be competitive if he or she disregards basic labor rights, which does not make sense and which is something we don't want in the end. So this is not an issue of competitiveness, it's simply an issue of compliance with already existing laws.
Absolutely. And one thing that I'd like to add on that is, in these sanctions are 3 to 5%. In some cases, they can get to 10%. In case of multiple convictions, is up to 30%. But it's a one-off. So the next year, you just go back to getting however much you were getting. And in many cases, you still get a lot of money when you're in prison. Sometimes it was tripled the amount of money they got. It's interesting. I don't know if anyone has comments on this. Otherwise, we can move on to the next policy lever. Okay, then let's move on to migrant worker and self-organization. This is the last one we want to touch upon, but rights are more reliable when those who hold them have a hand in enforcing them. Systems that are built only from above tend to produce reports and KPIs, whereas systems that involve workers tend to produce actually compliance. And we have here the Fair Food Program with Gerardo Reyes Chavez. The Fair Food Program pioneered a worker-driven monitoring and enforcement model in the United States. Their contribution demonstrates that giving workers actual enforcement power can change outcomes more effectively than compliance paperwork alone. Gerardo is a farm worker and key leader in the coalition of Immokalee workers who helped create the Fair Food Program. So, Gerardo, what could be done at the policy level to promote more self-organization? You're muted, sorry.
I'm so sorry. As I was listening to all the remarks from my fellow panelists, I was reflecting on some of the things that we have been able to do here with the program, and how some of the conversations in Europe right now are also conversations that we had here. For example, when I was hearing Pepe talking about the prices that growers receive, in our context as workers, we started to look at the problem as a systemic one, because that's how we should look at the solution to, in order to resolve it. Because otherwise, we would be going one case of abuse after another, one case of modern day slavery after another, which is how we basically were organizing at the beginning here in our community, until we realized that the agricultural industry, it's merely a subset of the retail food industry in this country. And from what I'm hearing, I'm seeing the same in Europe. When we realized that the importance of the power of the purchasing order, which is how they call it, we started to imagine what would it look like if those corporations that buy the tomatoes that are produced and other vegetables under abuses in our context, included on extreme situations of modern day slavery, workers being threatened to be killed, those threats extended to the families, situations of extreme abuse. What would it look like if it was workers themselves designing that code and establishing the rights in that code that are necessary, not just to identify problems, but to prevent them, even with the help of the market? We were naive at the beginning, thinking that the market was going to jump on top of this idea and join us, looking for something that would help their own image as a brand. But that wasn't the case. So we needed to create a campaign, the Campaign for Fair Food, which we started in 2021, after realizing that that's where the real power and influence was. To change the conditions of the growers that back then were very recalcitrant to sit at the table with us as workers. And after many years of campaigning, we were able to switch the public perception, which is something that I also been hearing in different forms here. It's difficult to land changes, even with the passing of the human rights due diligence directives, because there's a lot of people that don't know what that is, and there's a lot of reluctancy of all the people that should be playing a role in landing those new regulations, instead of pushing against them, as a benefit to both workers, the agricultural industry, as well as the market. So in our context, we have been able to, by bringing together corporations with the public pressure coming from our community, creating alliances across the United States, and then pushing the corporations to do the right thing, to pay a little bit more so that it goes directly to workers to offset the cost of an increase in wages for workers, but at the same time putting reverse to the effect that this massive power of the market pressuring the agricultural industry forces them to then have to cut cost of production somewhere. And usually it's with the workers. So by doing that, we reverse that impact of the market by having workers being the ones that craft the code of conduct. We make sure that nothing escapes that is absolutely necessary to protect the dignity of everyone. And one thing that I would say is, in all the conversations that I've heard, I just want to emphasize that regardless of, we as workers, maybe speaking indigenous languages, maybe not have had an opportunity to go to university, study economy, and all of those things, regardless of all of that, and the way in which we express ourselves, we're experts. We are experts on what we do every day. We are experts on the abuses that we confront every day. And we have really brilliant ideas on how, if we had the power, because at the end, this is a matter of power, how we could put reverse at the effect of the market on the lives of the most vulnerable in the supply chain. I see here with the human rights due diligence an opportunity and also a challenge. The opportunity is you have something that it's already stating that that's the expectation, So it's a process of involving the works that are part of these stories to tell their story, to bring up their ideas and expertise to the table, and to join forces with the growers that are willing to also do the same, because at the end, it is of benefit to both workers and growers, as well as for the entire economy. Corporations invest a lot of money, billions of dollars globally, to create a good image, but they don't address the abuses at the bottom of their own supply chains. But they spend a lot of money on that, what's called social auditing, CSR, corporate social responsibility, which has failed for decades, 3 decades or more now. If those corporations were to sit at the table and replicate something similar to what we have here, the Fair Food Program, they would be able to achieve the same thing, but with a guaranteed result of protection for workers at the bottom, because that's what the Fair Food Program does. When you have collaboration of workers, their employers, and the market going on the same direction in synergy, then you are going to have, you're going to achieve both things. What corporations fail to understand is that they will never be able to claim that their supply chain is clean until they do sit with the workers and collaborate together in crafting something that makes sense for the workers. Because, in the origin of both a Fair Food Program, something that we call worker-driven social responsibility, and the CSR, corporate social responsibility, its name says it all. The goal of CSR is to protect the corporation's brand.
Yeah.
The goal of worker-driven is to guarantee that workers have human rights on their place of work. But the difference is what we have built addresses both.
Yeah.
And I dare to say it might be even cheaper. So I think it's time to push for those ideas, and hopefully something like this can serve in other contexts. We're happy to share all the things that have worked on our end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think this is so important. I was very surprised to meet a lot of European parliamentarians for the investigation and finding out that very few of them had actually even ever visited a farm and who knew the conditions of farm workers. So it's definitely very important to integrate farmers and farm workers into the conversation much more also on the policy level. I see that Hannah has her hand up.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sylvia. I just wanted to remind everyone that I am monitoring the chat. So if any of you would like to ask any questions, people watching the live stream at the moment, then please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. I will relay them. But also, you will see that I have put a few links to the articles shared by Sylvia and Jonas, where they talk about social conditionality. And then there are a few articles shared by Roxane that are in French, if you're also interested, and a podcast that Sylvia and Jonas worked on. I've also shared a link about the Fair Food Program, so you can find out more. I'll share a link for each of the organizations that we heard from tonight so that you can also click on it and go straight to their website. But I will also put another link, which is to sign our 10 demands for migrant workers from our point of view as campaigners from Film and Campaign, working with the Pickers, the film that you just saw. So please don't hesitate to ask. I'm here to relay any questions.
Thank you. And, even if they can be questions, they can be perplexities, doubts, thoughts, reflections, anything. Otherwise, I don't know if there's anyone who wants to comment on this last point we were making with Gerardo in the panel.
Well, maybe I could do. I think this is a very good example, and it's still the question how to scale it also in the European setting. But one of the benefits which is coming from this campaign, really on the Pickers campaign, is that we are bringing so many different people together, and we're building a new community of exchanging, of learning how to measure and how to see it on a wider approach. So that was one of the reasons why we, as Appellando, as Alliance of Grievance Mechanisms, with the retailers, said, hey, we want to participate, we want to support this initiative. So in that, I think that is one of the way forward, is to use also the sounding board now, and we can produce here more evidence, more examples of encouragement also for what we see, some of the producers that are very hesitant because of certain experience from the buying practices from the big corporations. And at the same time, some of the retailers are very hesitant because of campaigning, being victim of campaigning, and they don't have any chance to bypass the market, right? So I think there are opportunities of good examples to share and building trust across civil society and business and governments. So thank you again also for the organizers, and now with also the link over the pond to Florida and that and also to Gerardo and your experience. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Margherita's hand up.
Yeah, I would like also to thank the experience of Gerardo, considering that especially in the social conditionality, but also in the corporate sustainability due diligence. So this new directive, it's really much, it's fundamental, it's pivotal that the workers, the migrant workers, they do raise attention, they do participate to the process of due diligence, and this means that in many cases an effort should be done in sustain their participation, because we know that in many cases they are in so weak conditions, especially if they are migrants without any legal documents that could be compliance with the law and so on, that make weaker the participation and make them weaker to raise their voice. So then we should think globally as a civil society, as a I mean, many actors, how to support them in doing at the best this role, and because of course the success of the law is in their hands, and is will be stronger as their participation could be um, relevant. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If there are no other comments, I think maybe we can call it here today, and hopefully we will keep chatting also individually with one another. I hope this is a good exchange and that conversations will keep going. This is just the start of the conversation, and that, you know, the campaign will keep going for a while, but this is maybe something for Hannah to add. And if anyone wants to join the Fair Pick campaign, maybe, I don't know if you've already shared the link. Yes, that's the QR code. Thank you so much for being here with us. And maybe one very last thing, you can write it down in the chat, what you hope for 2026, but also to the panelists, if there's anything that you have as a specific hope, a concrete hope for something that could happen in 2026 with regards to these issues. I hope that the social conditionality won't be completely watered down, and conversations about strengthening it will keep going on, because when we spoke with the director of DG Agri, he was saying that they would keep it as it was, and that it was already sort of a victory to be able to keep it that way. I think that we shouldn't, in this current political moment, we shouldn't just accept that things might move backwards. And so I hope that the conversation will keep going at the political level on it. I don't know if anyone else has any wishes, otherwise we can say goodbye.
I just hope that if I just hope that everyone in the world, in these times of celebration, many of us and many farm workers do not have their families with them. Let's keep every one of them in our thoughts and hearts, and not just as a memory, but as a way to try to find forms of connecting and making something happen in this 2026.
Thank you so much. And so thanks to everyone. And Margherita, yes.
Yeah, I hope that there could be stronger alliance between consumers and the pickers and the small producers, and in order to overcome such kind of exploitation and stop this watering trend that you mentioned, Sylvia, and that is really bad, because we are moving, we are stepping back. And so this kind of alliance should keep together human rights and environmental rights, also considering that agriculture is very much linked also to the to the protection of nature, and as one of the fundamental inputs of the agriculture, and also as a right of people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening, and we will speak soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye.